In the village of Zanzora, where traders from distant lands came to buy and sell, one man controlled it all, Mosi, the wealthiest merchant in the region. But while traders traveled far and wide to do business, Mosi never shared, never helped, and never trusted anyone. His shop was the grandest, filled with rare fabrics, shimmering jewels, and sacks of grain stacked high, but his doors only opened to those who could pay his ridiculous prices. The people of Zanzora suffered through droughts, poor harvests, and hard times, yet Mosi's wealth only grew. When desperate mothers begged him for food, he scoffed. "Nothing in life is free," he would say, counting his gold with oily fingers. Even his own children were not spared. He measured every grain of rice before serving them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mosi sat alone in his grand house, feasting. A table stretched before him, overflowing with roasted meat, fresh yams, and golden plantains, a meal fit for a king. Yet, he ate in silence, refusing to share even with his servants, who watched hungrily from the shadows. As he lifted a final, glistening piece of goat meat to his mouth, something went wrong, he gasped. His throat tightened. He clutched at his chest, his eyes bulging with terror. The room spun. The gold rings on his fingers felt heavier. The food he loved so much had turned against him. He tried to call for help, but no one came. Why would they? As his body collapsed onto the floor, his final breath rattled from his lips. His last words, "Bury me with my gold, so no one else takes what is mine." And then, silence, when the villagers found him. His hands were still clutching gold coins. But none of them mourned, they only stared, wondering if even death could separate Mosi from his greed. The next morning, the village elders gathered, standing around Mosi's lifeless body. His stiff fingers still clutched gold coins, even in death. His face, frozen in his final moments, looked as if he were still watching over his fortune. The villagers did not grieve. They did not weep. Instead, they whispered, "Should we honor his final wish?" One elder asked, glancing at the others, "What choice do we have?" Another replied, "Mosi was cruel, but his wealth built this village. If we refuse, perhaps his spirit will haunt us." And so, the villagers carried out his final demand. A grand tomb was built on the outskirts of Zanzora, larger than any home in the village. Inside, Mosi's body was placed on a stone platform, his arms still wrapped around bags of gold. Silver necklaces, glittering bracelets, and chests filled with jewels surrounded him. As the final stone was placed to seal the tomb, an old man named Baba Kofi shook his head. He spat on the ground and muttered, "Let the greedy man keep his riches, even in death." The villagers left in silence, but an uneasiness hung in the air. That night, as the moon cast long shadows over Zanzora, something strange happened. A strong wind howled through the village, rattling doors and windows. Dogs whimpered and hid under porches. The air felt thick, as if something unseen was watching. Then, just before midnight, a loud clanging echoed from the direction of Mosi's tomb. Something, or someone, was inside. A week had passed since Mosi's burial. The villagers tried to move on, though an uneasy feeling still lingered. It wasn't grief, it was something else. The wind still howled at night, and the animals refused to go near the tomb. Then, one morning, a young herdsman named Tund came running into the village, his face pale with terror. "The tomb," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "It's open." The villagers rushed to the burial site. The massive stone that had sealed the entrance was pushed aside. The once grand tomb now stood open like a gaping mouth. Inside, the gold was gone. Every last coin, every jewel, every piece of silver, vanished without a trace. "Who would dare steal from the dead?" gasped an elder. "Thieves," muttered another. "It must be thieves." But not everyone was convinced. "No one could have moved that stone alone," said Baba Kofi, his voice grim. "And look around, there are no footprints. No signs of digging. Nothing." The villagers exchanged nervous glances. If no one had stolen the gold, then where had it gone? Then came the second, more chilling discovery. A woman named Mama Folek hesitantly stepped into the tomb, peering into the darkness. She swallowed hard and turned back to the crowd, her voice shaking. "It's empty," she whispered. "What do you mean?" Someone asked. "The body," she said, her hands trembling. "Mosi's body is gone." A cold silence fell over the villagers. Mosi's gold had disappeared, and so had Mosi. Fear gripped Zanzora like an unseen hand, tightening its hold with each passing night. The disappearance of Mosi's body was disturbing enough, but what happened next sent pure terror through the village. It started with Kwaka the blacksmith. One evening, as he locked up his shop, he caught a glimpse of someone standing across the road, right in front of Mosi's old store. His heart stopped. The figure stood still as a statue, watching. The same height, the same broad shoulders. It was Mosi, but something was wrong. His skin was pale, almost gray, as if life had drained from it. His once bold eyes were now hollow, yet they burned with something unnatural. And when he spoke, his voice was exactly the same. "You have something of mine," the figure said. Kwaku didn't wait to hear more. He ran, breathless, straight to the village square. "I saw him. I swear on my ancestors, Mosi is back." The people gasped, but not everyone believed him. "Impossible," an elder scoffed. "The dead do not walk." But that very night, others started experiencing strange things. A traveling trader, sleeping near the market, woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps outside his hut. He held his breath, listening as the steps grew louder, then stopped. Summoning courage, he peeked outside. No one was there, but in the dirt, a single golden coin lay gleaming under the moonlight. By morning, whispers spread like wildfire. Doors creaked open on their own. Gold pieces appeared and disappeared mysteriously in the market. And worst of all, Mosi's laughter, low, raspy, and chilling, was heard drifting through the village at night. By the third night, no one dared to leave their homes after dark. The village of Zanzora was drowning in fear. People refused to step outside after sunset, and merchants packed up their goods before dusk. The eerie sightings, the vanishing gold, and the chilling laughter of a man who should be dead had shaken even the bravest warriors. The village elders called for an urgent gathering. The people of Zanzora, desperate for answers, packed the meeting ground. Whispers filled the air. Was this truly a curse? Was Mosi haunting them? Or had someone played a terrible trick? Then, Baba Osei, the oldest and wisest elder, stepped forward. His frail hands shook as he leaned on his carved wooden staff, his voice deep and steady. "This is not the first time a greedy soul has tried to keep their riches beyond the grave," he said. The crowd fell silent. He took a deep breath and continued. "Long ago, in a village far from here, there was a man just like Mosi. He hoarded wealth, cheated his people, and trusted no one. When he died, he too demanded to be buried with his gold. But soon after, strange things began happening. Just like now, the villagers listened, their eyes wide with fear. That man did not stay in his grave," Baba Osei went on. "His soul wandered, unable to rest, searching for the wealth he clung to in life. But the legend tells us this, the curse of the unfinished debt. Those who take more than they give, who hoard riches while others suffer, can never truly leave this world in peace." A murmur spread through the crowd. Then, "How do we stop it?" a woman asked, her voice shaking. Baba Osei's gaze darkened. "The only way to break the curse is to return the stolen riches to those they were taken from." Gasps rippled through the villagers. "But the gold is gone." Kwaku, the blacksmith, protested. "How can we return what has vanished?" A heavy silence followed. If the gold was the key to ending this nightmare, then where had it gone? That question hung over the village like a storm cloud. And before the night was over, they would discover a truth more terrifying than any of them had imagined. The air in Zanzora was thick with fear. The villagers barely slept, and those who did awoke to nightmares. Mosi's shadow loomed over them, his restless spirit refusing to fade. Then, on a night when the moon hung low and the wind carried whispers through the village, a stranger arrived. He was cloaked in dust from the road, his sandals worn from long travel. His face was hidden under the hood of his robe, but his eyes, sharp and filled with secrets, scanned the gathered villagers with caution. The chief, Nana Kwame, stepped forward. "Who are you?" The stranger pulled back his hood, revealing a face hardened by years of trade and travel. "My name is Malik. I am a merchant from the east, and I know what happened to the gold." A stunned silence spread through the crowd. Then, all at once, voices erupted, questions, demands, accusations. "You took it," someone shouted. "Where is it?" Malik raised a hand. "Yes, I took it. But listen to me, because I was not the first to enter the tomb that night." The crowd fell silent again, hanging on to his every word. Malik took a deep breath and spoke, his voice low but firm. "I arrived in Zanzora the night Mosi was buried. I heard of the gold buried with him, and greed led me to his tomb." He paused, his fingers tightening into fists. "But when I entered, I was not alone." The villagers leaned in, their skin prickling. "There was another figure in the darkness," Malik continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "A figure that did not walk like a man. It moved strangely, its steps uneven, as if it did not belong to this world." A chill swept through the villagers. Some clutched their arms, others took a step back. I saw only its shadow, Malik admitted. But I heard its breath. Heavy, wet, wrong, a young boy whimpered, clutching his mother's waist, and then, Nana Kwame pressed. Malik swallowed hard. I did what any foolish man would do. I grabbed as much gold as I could and ran. I did not look back. His voice grew even quieter. But I felt something behind me. Watching, following. He hesitated before adding, I left Zanzora that night. But I have not known peace since. A heavy silence filled the air. The villagers' worst fear had been spoken aloud. Mosi's gold was stolen. But someone, or something, had been in that tomb before Malik, and whatever it was, it had never left. The villagers stood frozen, their eyes locked on Malik. His story had shaken them, but what he said next sent a chill through every soul in Zanzora. I was not the first to enter the tomb, Malik repeated, his voice grave. Mosi's own servant, Django, was there before me. A murmur spread through the crowd. Django, a name they had not heard in weeks. Django. Nana Kwame frowned. Where is he now? Malik exhaled sharply. Gone. The villagers gasped. Gone. What do you mean gone? An elder asked, his voice uneasy. Malik stepped closer, lowering his voice as if afraid to speak the truth aloud. Django had served Mosi for years. He endured his cruelty, his greed. The men treated him like dirt. The night of the burial, he saw his chance. He wanted revenge. He wanted the gold for himself. The crowd bristled at the thought. Some nodded. Who could blame him? Others shifted uneasily, sensing something far worse lurking in Malik's words. But when Django opened the coffin, Malik hesitated. Mosi's body was gone. The villagers recoiled in horror. Gone, someone echoed. How? Malik's gaze darkened. Instead, he found something else. A message. He let the words hang in the air before finally saying them. It was written on the inside of the coffin lid. A shiver ran through him as he spoke the words Django had read that night. Greed does not rest. Greed does not die. Greed finds a new master. The wind howled through the marketplace, sending dust swirling around their feet. The words felt like an unspoken curse. Django tried to run, Malik continued, but he was never seen again. The villagers exchanged fearful glances. Had Django been taken? Had Mosi's greed claimed him? Then, a woman in the crowd gasped. If greed finds a new master, then who has it now? A dreadful silence followed. Somewhere, someone had inherited Mosi's greed, and that meant the curse was far from over. The village was no longer just afraid, it was paralyzed by fear. Mosi's death had not freed Zanzora from his cruelty, it had only twisted his greed into something far darker. The gold, Baba Ose muttered, his voice trembling as the truth began to unfold. It was never just gold. The villagers had gathered in the square, but there was a heavy silence hanging in the air. They could feel it now, the weight of Mosi's greed still pressing on them. Even in death, Malik, who had unknowingly carried the curse, stood at the center of their horror. His hands shook as he tried to make sense of it all. You're saying, the gold? He asked, his voice raw. It wasn't just treasure. It was a trap. Baba Ose nodded slowly, his eyes grave. Yes, Mosi's greed was stronger than death itself. He didn't just want to keep his riches, he wanted them to last forever. He trapped his own soul inside that gold. So when someone took it, they didn't just take wealth. They took his curse. Malik's face paled. But I didn't know. That's the trick, Baba Ose continued, his voice hard. You never knew. And now that you've brought the gold back here, the curse follows. The wind seemed to pick up, swirling around them like an omen. What now? Someone whispered from the crowd. Before anyone could answer, the ground shook slightly, as if the very earth itself was groaning under the weight of the curse. That night, the village was restless. No one slept. They could feel Mosi's presence in the very air, his greed seeping into every corner of Zanzora. But the worst was yet to come. When dawn broke, a cold stillness hung over the village. Malik's tent, which had stood at the edge of the square, was gone. There was no sign of him, no traces of his belongings. It was as though he had vanished without a trace. The villagers gathered around the empty space, exchanging fearful glances. Where did he go? They whispered. A child pointed to the ground, her voice trembling. Look, there, leading from Malik's tent, were faint footprints in the dirt, deep, heavy marks that seemed to stretch on for miles. But as they followed them, they seemed to fade into the dust, as though they were being swallowed by the earth itself, the curse. Baba Ose whispered. It's still here. And now, it's moved on to someone else. The village was no longer just haunted by Mosi's greed. It was cursed to live with it forever. The elders of Zanzora, tired of the haunting fear that had gripped their village for so long, decided it was time to end Mosi's curse. They gathered every last piece of gold, every coin, every jewel, and made a decision that would change their village forever. "We cannot let Mosi's greed continue to poison us," Baba Ose declared. His voice was firm, yet the weight of the years of suffering was heavy in it. "We will do what he never could. We will share this wealth. We will return it to those he wronged, to the poor, the sick, and the families he hurt." As the elders moved from house to house, distributing the gold, the villagers felt a sense of relief, though it was hard to shake the lingering tension. "It's what should have been done all along," one villager whispered as he received a small portion of the gold. "But will it be enough to free us?" The moment the last coin was given away, a strange calm fell over the village. The air, which had once felt thick with the weight of greed, was now clear. No more strange sounds in the night. No more vanishing gold. For the first time in years, Zanzora felt peaceful. "It's over," one elder sighed, watching the sunset from his home. "The curse is lifted." But just as the last of the villagers settled into the new peace, the earth beneath them rumbled. The ground shook for only a moment, but it was enough. The villagers rushed to the graveyard, fearing the worst, only to find that Mosi's tomb was sealed once more, completely. The stone had locked into place, and a strange, heavy silence hung over it. "It's done," Baba Ose said softly, his voice filled with a finality that seemed to echo through the ages. "Mosi's greed can never reach us again."